Okay, so I usually talk about mental perseverance and things like that in my videos related to running. But this isn't any of that. This is just a recap of the Malnad Ultra. So we arrived a day before the race and went directly to the briefing before reaching our homestay. The race had two courses, 50 kilometers and 80 kilometers. I was doing the 50 kilometer. There were parts of this race that were done through restricted forest areas which people can't really roam unless they have permission, which the race organizers did. At the briefing we were told the general layout of the route, how the course would be structured, etc. The key points to note were first at E, where we would see a historic temple, then around F, where we would see the most scenic view of the run. From F, we head to G and back to F, then head to H. And this patch is where we were told we would find the most leech infested areas. It would also be the area the race directors had set up an aid station across a stream, since they deliberately wanted us to get our feet wet. In general, there were aid stations every 6 to 7 kilometers, some of which were recording our arrivals through our bib, so they would note down the time and your bib number. After H, we came across the only cutoff for the 50 kilometer course, which was the 31 kilometer mark. We needed to be there by 1300 hours, and after this point we would be out of the restricted forest area for the rest of the run. The 80k runners needed to be at the finish line by 4 p.m. and the 31 kilometer mark applied to them as well. For any of the runners that didn't make either of these checkpoints in time, the runner would be pulled out and given a DNF or did not finish. And in case you're interested, the 80k runners after the finish point would then go complete their 30 kilometers on roads, broken tarmac, things like that throughout the night. But since the race director was concerned about their safety at night, especially to do with elephant herds, because they had spotted a few elephant herds and individual tuskers also, the plan was that there would be the same aid stations, because they were just cars. They would go up and down, back and forth between the first runner and the last runner to ensure that nothing untoward happens to any of the runners, and just to be there for them if something were to go sideways. As we stopped for questions, I asked a question about whether there would be bears. Somebody else asked about snakes, somebody else about elephants, or I guess elephants were just generally mentioned anyway. And what we were told is that even through the morning part of the run, which is what the 50 and the 80k people were doing together, there would be elephants, bears, snakes, because we were entering their home territory, of course. There would also be leeches, but leeches were just a minor discomfort at worst. So the animals were the ones that I was particularly concerned about, and others were as well. We were told to keep our eyes on the road, and snakes would only be a problem if you either physically run into them or worse, step on them, and that would be the more likely thing to happen, because we were told that the snakes would be out in the morning just to get some sun, since they've been cold all night. So we were told to really watch where our feet are landing and just keep a good sense of awareness of things around you in case you spot elephants, bears, etc. And if we were to see a bear or an elephant, we were to just slowly back away and not try in any way to provoke either of the animals. We were also told to stay in groups. First time runners, which I was, were instructed to just worry about finishing the race, not necessarily keeping time, and I wasn't keeping time. I was just trying to finish the race. And through all of this, my parents were there with me, offering support, and they were there with me in the briefing, and we came out, and it just gave you the sense of realism, because I knew that these animals and these threats would be there, but just to hear it being pointed out by somebody who's been in that locality preparing the race and actually seeing those animals. There were some videos on Instagram of elephants on the course that they had spotted also, but just to see all of this being pointed out by somebody who's been there was very discomforting, for me at least. So the briefing was over, we went back home to our homestay, we ordered an early dinner. I was reading my book that I'd carried along with me. The book's called India's Most Fearless, stories about people in the Indian Army, Navy, Air Force, just doing heroic activities. I typically like to read about the army, so that's the book I was reading. And I conked off pretty early, and surprisingly I slept well too, because before an event I don't typically get very good sleep, because it's all of the excitement and stuff like that, not just for a run but anything big that might be happening. But I surprisingly slept quite well. The next day we arrived at the starting line. The 80k runners started their run at about 6:45, maybe between 6:30 6:45, I wasn't sure. And us, the 50k runners, we started our run at 7 o'clock. We were given fresh food, breakfast, hot breakfast, which was surprisingly quite good. And we were told by the race director in the morning that things go sideways all the time apparently in these things, and I can imagine, because it's a huge event you're putting together. So the race director told us that the forest department had decided to cordon off a section of about 3-ish kilometers. So that's why the final number for runners ended up being not 50k, but about just over 47k, depending on whose watch you're looking at. There was variation between people's watches tracking their runs. So right off the bat we started downhill and entered a trail soon enough. Nothing particularly challenging, but you still needed your eyes to be on the road, because just watching out for things, especially when you're told that snakes will be sunbathing in the morning. So I was particularly mindful of that. We had race organizers also on the bike, just cycling along with us as much as possible on that trail. As we went through the forest area, particularly on the hilly patches of the trail, you could just see greenery everywhere. It was lush, it was trees everywhere, and you could not see any human settlement anywhere as far as the eye could see. The weather was great. It was not sunny. It was really windy, so if you stopped for a little while, you would not want to do that, because literally all you could hear was wind, and you would cool down. Especially if you're sweating a little bit, even just a little bit, that wind would really cool you down quite fast. So we just kept pushing on. And as we approached D and saw the uphill climb that was going up to E, man, everybody was just walking the entire time. And when I was walking that place, just walking up that hill, just walking, my heart rate was at about 150 beats per minute. I couldn't even walk fast. I had to stay at 150 beats per minute. Just walking. And I'd set my watch to give me alerts on my wrist whenever I cross the zone 2 mark, which for me is about 153, 154 beats per minute, just so that I could stay underneath that point and not push through and burn myself out in just the initial portion of the run. And I was just walking, talking to people whenever I possibly could. There were people like me from Bangalore, most of them, and some people, or rather most of the people I would guess, were there in a group of runners also. So, I was there just running by myself, but a bunch of people had come together and they were doing the run together also. So we reached the top at the temple, take the circuit around the temple, and I stopped at the aid station that was right there. They were offering biscuits, sandwiches, salt, electrolyte, water and oranges. I took a couple of oranges and I was on my way down. Now on the way down, I started to realize something that only experience doing this can teach you. You see, I haven't really run a race with a ton of elevation. This entire race was 1.2 kilometers of ascent and 1.2 kilometers of descent, and that was just the 50 kilometer mark. And you don't really know what that's like until you've experienced it before, and I hadn't. As you start to come downhill, your quads and your knees really start to take a beating. And even mentally you're thinking, wait, I wasted all of this time just walking up. Let me try and make up some time by running downhill instead of, walking it back down. If you aren't careful, and even if you're careful, this can really start messing up your legs and your knees. So we descend down and my legs are doing alright at this point, and we carry along. After a while we entered the forest patch again, and this is where we started seeing fresh elephant dung, and we were wondering where the elephants might have been. But we were in a group, so that helped at least calm my nerves a bit. The only track that there was in our way was made, you could see it was just freshly made by trucks, etc. going over it, and the race director had told us that the aid stations are just basically pickup trucks with all of the aid in the back of the truck. So my understanding was that entire path that we saw, calling it a path is sort of doing it an injustice, but whatever we saw was made by those trucks just going back and forth relatively recently on that track. But it was running on these tracks that started the second set of problems for me, which was running on these pointy rocks would really poke at the soles of your feet. Now, it wouldn't really, nothing penetrated through the shoe or something like that, but just doing this repeatedly over and over, the soles of your feet start taking a beating. To my surprise though, there were some people who were running this same track and the whole 50k race in 5-finger shoes, which, if you don't know, they're these shoes where they encourage a more natural form of running, but they have no padding or next to no padding on their soles. And a couple of people, believe it or not, were doing the run bare feet, which was just astounding. And then the last set of problems during this time was the trail was just very technical, and you just needed to be switched on the entire time running, making sure your foot is landing exactly the right place so that you avoid any injury or mishaps. In fact, there was this one gentleman who I ran into at one of the aid stations, and my understanding was he had taken a fall and his face was bloodied. There was blood dripping down from his eyebrows on his face, and his fingers were also bleeding, and he had just patched himself up with some band-aid and stuff like that. Didn't really stop the bleeding because the sweat also down your face, and he was still running. So that was very humbling for me, and it put things into a lot of perspective. In general, it was really nice doing this run with like-minded people. I remember at this point at F where we needed to go up to F, take a U-turn and then come back. There wasn't a race official over there noting down our timing. So after the race, somebody had asked me, given that nobody was there, did you see anybody just take a shortcut, not actually go all the way till F and then come back? And at least during the time that I was doing the run around F, I did not see a single person take a shortcut or anything like that. They all went to F, did the roundabout around a tree, and then came back the same way. In fact, there were people who were helping each other out on that turn, announcing, you need to go back, U-turn at the tree, U-turn at the tree. When we were going down and people were coming back up from that tree, people were telling us just U-turn at the tree, and that's how we all knew that, we're just supposed to take a roundabout at that tree and come back. So the sense of community was just really nice. So by now the terrain had really started to take a toll on my legs. Animal attacks were the least of my concerns. I wasn't even bothered about it because the legs were hurting so much. And as I mentioned, despite all that, you really needed to be focused on where you were running and watching out for where your foot is landing because the terrain was very technical. And you wanted to make up for lost time that you were just walking up a hill or something like that. Next, we entered this patch which was supposedly the leech infestation area, where there was a lot of leeches apparently, and that was because the greenery had just sort of overgrown quite a bit and there was no sun that reached the ground. During this course, we just couldn't see what the ground was and we were just running. There was this other person behind me and I was just talking to him the entire time. I've never seen his face because I didn't look back and I don't know what his name is. But we were just talking the entire time about how the race was and where we needed to go next, where the next turn was, things like that. And we were just running. We didn't know where our feet were landing because couldn't see anything. But we were running through it. We could, the foliage was maybe up till chest level or stomach level, and we couldn't really see where the ground was. So we were just trusting that our feet will land correctly and moving on. Next point of interest that we come along is the stream where the race officials had put the aid station across the stream. Cold as fuck. Deliberately wanting to make people go through the stream and experience the wet feet and all of that. There were no race officials on the other side of the stream either to note down the numbers or the timing of the people who arrived. So some people considered not doing it either, but at least the time that I was there I couldn't see anybody just taking a U-turn before the stream. I walked through the stream without my shoes on, took it off on one side of the stream, and man, this thing was not enjoyable while I was in it. You never knew what rock is going to give away. The rocks that were there, they were super pointy and you really needed to walk very, very carefully. I saw a couple of people just taking a fall and just falling either hand first or butt first into the stream. While I was there, I didn't see anybody get hurt. It was just damn it, I fell down, that kind of thing. So I crossed to the aid station, had a refill, had some oranges, maybe a couple of breads, made my way back, and that's when I almost slipped and hit the ball of my foot against one of the rocks, and I was sure that that would have cut me, but made my way through back on the other side of the stream and put my shoes on. I dried myself with my arm covers, and luckily there wasn't any bleeding, so put my shoes back on, and just doing that little bit of rest where I could just sit and put my shoes back on felt wonderful. My feet had started to hurt, not just my muscles but also the skin of my feet, really hurting bad now. So after about an hour or so, at around 11:30 hours, I was at the 31-kilometer checkpoint, and that was a huge relief because now the time pressure was completely off of us. The next section was from that checkpoint up a hill and then back down, and man, this section was just, it was horrible in the ascent that it was. We were just back again, reduced to a walk up the entire thing for could have been 20-25 minutes, and we reached up. There was an aid station, got a photo click, there was a photographer there, got a photo click, got some food, electrolyte, all of that, and then we were on our way back down. And by now, running downhill, the descent was really getting to me. My legs, my quads were hurting, but my right knee also started giving me a lot of pain. So we reached back down on the checkpoint, back at the checkpoint. I enjoyed a sandwich with just some jam in it. Enjoyed that rest where I was just sitting and eating my sandwich. And after that, started walking, running back to the next one. At the next aid station, I decided to do something about my knee pain. So, did all the refueling with the food, etc. And I just stopped by a bus stop that was nearby. And the race officials the previous day had given us a spray and a whistle just in case we may need it. So I took out the spray. It was just a small little bottle. Took out that spray, sprayed it on my knee, and I had a knee brace in my bag. So I put that on, and that really helped. But unfortunately, I had only one of those. I could have used it on my other knee also. But I just carried one because I wanted to save up on the weight. The next point of significance that I remember was this point where this water tank was being filled up by water from some of the local streams, and somebody had gone while just taking a small detour. It was just like maybe 10 feet, 10 steps, something like that, away from the official course. So he just let his face get wet in the overflowing water, and he was on his way back when I ran into this person. And then he also suggested, the course is here, but you may want to go dip your face in the water. So I also walked up to that tank, and water was overflowing, so I just held my face underneath that water, and it was like a breath of fresh air for a broken spirit. After the checkpoint, the entire run was on the road, and by now my legs were feeling really, really tired, and just they'd really taken a beating. So while I was running, my legs just felt like there were 2 sacks of rice. There was no stability. They were feeling very, very heavy. I pushed through at the end though, going a little faster right at the end of the race. My official time was 7 hours and 46 minutes according to my watch, and I didn't look up the race time, but it would have been similar. I was certainly not prepared for this run. I was not prepared for the ascents and descents. I was not well trained enough in just running in the heat, and definitely not for 7.5 hours. But the run was absolutely worth it, and if you get the chance to do it next year, please go for it. The experience of it, the scenic views, the running downhill, uphill, all of that, the camaraderie of it, it just makes all of it worth it. So if you do get the chance to do it next year, please try it out. After the run, I couldn't really talk much. I didn't move a muscle frivolously. I was walking as if my legs were sticks. And so I'm really thankful to my parents who were there for me for support before and after the run. They were there at the finish line, and they got me anything and everything that I needed. I ate a little bit, I had some coffee, and my dad then drove us all back home. And even though I'd had some coffee, I was in the back seat. I just completely passed out for 2 hours, and I believe that is the best sleep I've ever had, sitting in a car or a plane or something like that. On the car ride home, word started coming in through Instagram and people posting about the run on their statuses that the 80k runners had started to finish in right about at 7 p.m. or something like that, and eventually others would have finished also. My right knee has taken a long while to recover. I don't know what it was that got the right knee more banged up than the left one, but I am at 100% now, and I'm just so thankful that I don't have to do anything like this for the rest of the year. So that's been it. It was a hell of a race and it humbled me a lot, like long distance events usually do. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.